Hello and welcome to Sterling Armory's Oakeshott Typology series. Real quick, we are on episode, I think this is 16. This is our second episode on pommel types. And the last episode I recorded pretty late in the day and I was quite tired. And towards the end I said we were going to cover T-cozy and stuff, and that was completely wrong. So the first section of the pommels that we covered was all of the brazelnut and I call it like boat-shaped pommels. That's the name that I used when I was a kid. But covered the first section of those, which are on type 10s and type 11 blades, and some 12s as well. But today we're going to go into a new one. So before we get going, though, if you're new to the channel and new to this series, my name is Chris. I am the owner and sword maker, along with some of my friends with Sterling Armory. And this particular series is about the Oakeshott Typology, which is a typology of medieval swords that describes the evolution and design of medieval swords. And we have a whole series on this, so if you want to see everything, please go back to the beginning, where we go through all the blade types, and then we go through guards, and now we're on the pommels. However, we have more than that in our channel. We have our Sword Talk podcast series, which is probably our most popular series. And we have a great episode of that coming out this week, Thursday. So that'll drop in about 2 days. But for now, let's continue our topic. I'm saying a lot of ums today. I guess I always do. But let's continue on our topic of Oakeshott's typology and pommel types. Real quick, our reference that we use is our Sword in the Age of Chivalry from Edward Oakeshott. That's his first big book on the Oakeshott typology. And the second book is Records of the Medieval Sword, but we're not using that too much for pommel stuff. The other resource we use, I was just informed, has been offline for a bit. So my Armory, and spelled the British way, Armory, that was also a vital resource for sword stuff. It had a great collection of Oakeshott typology stuff. The articles they wrote and everything it did was really well put together. I'm not sure if the site's down permanently. I don't know what's going on there, but yeah, I just checked before I started here, and the site is down. The forums are down as well. I did notice they do have a Facebook page, though. So their Facebook page has a great amount of photos and documents and stuff as well. So I recommend jumping on the Facebook page, although it looks like it hasn't been active since early 2020, but it's still a great resource. But big resource, can't go wrong with the books. So if you do want to follow us from the books, we are on chapter 3, I believe, is Pommels. Could be completely wrong there. Chapter 3, pommel forms. So we are picking up where we left off. There is a large amount of pommel forms, over 30, and we're going into the next section of pommel forms. So we started with the brazelnut and kind of pear-shaped pommels, and now we're diving into the wheel pommels, which are the most historically available or most recorded types of pommels that we see. Again, it's kind of broken into two groups. So the first number of pommel types will be mainly from early type 10 blades all the way down to the 10th century up to about 1250. And then the ones after that, the subtypes, were actually common later on. So we'll go through that for each type. I'm also working with a new setup here, so I have a new monitor. My computer's over there, so if I do look over there and back, it's because I'm looking at my two different monitors here. Okay, so real quick. So we covered type A through F, if I remember correctly. Is that right? Yeah. So type A through F pommels was in the prior video, and again, those are all the more Viking style, elongated, wide pommels. Whereas now we're diving more into the medieval style, cylindrical wheel pommels. Okay. So the first, let me pull up. Almost forgot. I'm already using the wrong mouse here. So first pommel types. Let me share here. So the first one of the wheel type is type G. And again, I'm going to go through from his words on what they actually mean. So type G, that first pommel type of the wheels, is a plain disc, usually slightly convexed on its two faces. And it's usually about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch thick. Some examples dating after 1400 have concave faces. So again, up to 1250, these pommels are very, very popular, and then they seem to die out a little bit in the late 1400s, and then they come back after 1400, where they have some concave faces to them. And then type H, which is similar to that, but just slightly different. So basically here the edges of the disc are chamfered off each face, giving a low prominence on either side, and the inner face is about a quarter less diameter. So what they're saying is basically you have a very small chamfer around the perimeter of that. So that's what makes it different from type G. So two different wheel type pommels. Same thing with this as well. It was very popular early on, so 10th century to around the 15th century. And then it kind of died out for a little bit. It kind of went away, and then it comes back later on in the 1500s, later 1500s. So, two types wheel pommels. We have a couple more basic wheel pommels, but the biggest thing that a lot of modern manufacturers sometimes get wrong on these is how thick they are. So as he says here, they're usually about ½ inch to an inch thick. If they're an inch thick, they're usually hollow. That's the other thing that's not really stated here. But they're usually very light and either very thin. He says ½ inch. I've seen some that are less than a ½ inch. There's actually a couple in the Wallace collection that are almost a quarter of an inch, if not flatter. So they're very flat wheel pommels. That's really the big gist there. Okay, let's jump to the next type. Oh, the H types are usually a little thicker, mainly because they have that chamfer. But they're still often quite flat. So moving on to the next types. So everything we're covering today is wheel pommels. So on the next one, apologies, these are a little blurry. These are my own photos out of the book, but they're just blurry. I didn't notice that till I pulled them in. So type I, I'm actually not sure why he differentiates I and H. Essentially, I'll read from him real quick, but what he's saying is the inner disc on the surface there, so if you're looking at the lower image, the inner disc is much smaller than it was in H, and the chamfers are much wider, and the whole pommel is much deeper from front to back. So he's saying the whole pommel is thicker, but the chamfers are much larger. But to me, it's essentially the same as H. You just have a larger chamfer on each side. He is right, though, that these are more often thicker because that chamfer is much larger. If you want to have the same mass, then it has to be thicker, right? So that's type I. So type J, again, I'm not really sure why he specifically makes these different, because in my opinion, these could all be in the same type, but he does make them slightly different. So type J, what he's saying is similar to I, but the chamfered faces, or what he calls the sloping faces, are deeply hollowed out. So if you look at the side view, which is the top view, the only difference between I and J is instead of a straight line for your chamfer, now you're hollow ground out for your chamfer. But essentially, it's the same pommel. And then type K is very similar to J, but that center boss is just a lot smaller. So that's really all he's saying. And same with the prior two types. So they were very common kind of early on. Then they died out for a little bit, and then they come back again, and they become very popular in the 1400s. So late 1300s, early 1400s. And I don't think we quite know why that's the case, but that is what it is. So those are all the basic wheel type forms, and now we have a bunch of subtypes of those forms. Let me jump over. So in his actual topology, he doesn't go into the subtypes for pommels till a little later down. It's actually a couple pages later, but I want to keep all the wheel pommels grouped in together. So if we go back, think of the first pommel we looked at, which was the G. So now we have two subtypes of G. And again, I'm not sure why, because he usually doesn't differentiate subtypes from a main type if it's just cosmetic. And these particular ones are just cosmetic. So, but he does make them separate types. My guess is because they are so common. So he's saying type G1. So again, now all of the G through, I'm blanking on my types here. G through K are all very common across the whole medieval time, but they have a kind of a time zone from 1300s to 1400s, depending on which pommel, where it kind of has a dead zone and it's not quite as popular anymore. However, all of these new subtypes are popular later on. So these are 14th, 15th, 16th century where they're more popular. So G1. So this doesn't appear until the second quarter of the 15th century. So again, much later. And it appears to be purely Italian. The faces are strongly convex, so it often gives the appearance of a slightly flattened globe rather than a disc that's swelled out. And then each shape is a flower. So yeah, that's it for that one. And then type G1, or I'm sorry, G2 is the same form as G1, and it's the same time period as that as well, except for it's more of a shell than it is a flower. So again, both of these are Italian. I'm not sure why they are a separate subtype altogether, but yeah, and I can understand where some people see this and don't think of this as a wheel pommel. They think of it as a globe that's been, or like a ball that's been squished. But these are technically wheel pommels. Okay, next one. So remember back type H, which is the one with the chamfer in it. So now we have H1, which is instead of being a round wheel pommel, it's actually ovaled out. These are very, very popular on type 16 blades. And let's see what he says about them here. So they first appear about 1350 and seem to have gone out of favor until the first quarter of the 15th century. So as the other ones are. It's always very flat, oval in form, never circular. So yeah, the biggest difference between H1 and the original H is just that it's oval instead of circular. These are very common. You don't see them done too much in the reproduction market today. So Delton makes a couple of these in his blades, type 16s. The Art of Sword Making does. I've seen him do a couple. I've only done one because they're just not requested that much. But they are very historical. You see them in museums all over the place. There's a bunch in Leeds. I believe actually, I'm not sure if the Wells collection has one. But you see a lot of them in Leeds, a couple of them at the Met. In a lot of the big museums, you'll see them all over the place. So more common than I actually thought. And then type I. So if you think back to the I wheel pommel with the smaller internal disc. So basically the smaller space there. So type I is that version, but instead of being round, now it's in a hexagonal or octagonal faceted shape. So again, not quite common until about late 1300s, early 1400s, and then it disappears. So that is the I1. So that's the subtype of type I there. So I believe, no, I have one more. So last one. By the way, the faceted pommels, I personally like them a lot. I've done a bunch. I don't see them done that often either. And there's another version that's faceted like a flower, but he actually calls that an entirely different type. I'm not sure why. I would think that would be included here because it's essentially the same, just the outer perimeter is a little different, but we'll get to that in another video. But yeah, the faceted wheel pommels are I think they're very neat. And you do see them not as often, but you do see some historical examples in the various museums around. By the way, I've also seen those a lot of those in brass or bronze instead of in steel. And then last one, this has become one of my favorite types to make, is J1. So if you think back to J, so J was the wheel pommel with the chamfers that were heavily hollowed out. So now we have J1 where on the face itself, there's a hollowed out center in it. So let me read what he says for J1. So he's saying this is an elaborate form of the classical wheel pommel. The best examples are on type 18 blades, which I love doing those for type 18B blades especially, and sometimes type 18 arming swords. And I think the exact one he's talking so he's talking about the one for King Henry V, which is an arming sword. It has a giant version of one of these, but that one is also, it's so large it's hollowed out, so it doesn't feel light. So it's a very neat pommel. So yeah, you'll see those very often on type 15s as well as type 18s, but it's a very common pommel shape later on in medieval time periods. So that is it for our wheel pommel types. And also at the end of this video, we've pretty much covered all pommel types that you can find prior to 1250. So all the group 1 blades in Oakeshott's Typology, we've covered pretty much all of the pommels. There are a few more that he'll cover. We'll cover in probably in the next video, that are a lot more rare. But for the most part, that covers 90% of the pommels you'll find on medieval blades in Oakeshott's Group 1. So next video, we're going to jump into the ones from Group 2 and maybe some of the oddities that are in Group 1. But yeah, that is it so far. So I hope you're enjoying these videos. Let me still get used to my setup here. So hope you're enjoying these videos. As you can see behind me, by the way. So again, these two pommels are ones right out of what we were just talking about. Same with my older one here. And those are by far the most historically prominent, and the ones I also enjoy making a lot. So the other thing that's interesting with wheel pommels in the HEMA communities, especially in the last, I don't know, 5-6 years, there was a kind of negative, what's the word for it? It was kind of a negative connotation when it comes to wheel pommels. Like, a lot of people didn't like them. They didn't like how they felt. They didn't feel they were comfortable. They didn't feel like they can get a good grip on them. They hurt their hands. My biggest comment to that is anytime I held a sword with wheel pommel that somebody had a remark like that to, it was because the wheel pommel was not made correctly. So it didn't really match a historically accurate pommel. Mainly, it's how sharp the edges were, right? So historically, these wheel pommels are very comfortable to hold. There's probably some that aren't. Like on arming swords, it's not quite as important to get a second hand on that pommel, right? You wouldn't need to. But on long swords, especially with wheel pommels, they should be comfortable. You should be able to get your hand around them and not hurt yourself. So I guess the message to the HEMA community is try not to let modern manufacturing issues of wheel pommels taint you on the actual wheel pommel itself, because most long swords have them, depending on your time period. So. But yeah, and I've honestly never had that comment on my personal ones. I tend to round my edges off quite well on the wheel pommel, so they should be very comfortable. I don't think I've ever had a comment that one of mine was not comfortable. So, but yeah, so that is it for wheel pommels type G through, I already forgot, G through J. Yeah, G through J. So we are, sorry, J through K, right? No, I already forgot. But yeah, so all the wheel pommels. And let me make sure I'm not mistaken here. You can see how organized I am, by the way. So here we go. Yeah, J through K. I was right. Okay, so all the wheel pommels are done there. And any questions, please comment below. And I also have linked below to our other video stuff as well as our Oakeshott Typology stuff. So I highly recommend you guys jump on, comment, please like, share. And thanks to you guys so much for joining us. And don't forget to check out Sword Talk this Thursday. And we will catch you next time. Thanks.